Welcome into the Inside Scoop. Today is Sunday, February 2nd. I am your host, Josh Newberg, and we are live from Nashville, Tennessee. We've got a ton of recruiting buzz to cover today. The February dead period starts literally in a couple hours, so let's talk about these major developments that were going on across the country this weekend. We're heading out to Athens. The Dogs had a big junior day. We'll be in Tuscaloosa to talk to Andrew Bone from Bama Online. Then we're going to head out to LA, where the USC Trojans, the number 2 class in America, are making a legitimate run at number 1. But first, let's talk about the biggest developments from the weekend in the recruiting world. And there was quite a few. I know the dead period starts in February, but this weekend, there was a lot of action as we head into that dead period. So let's get into it. But first, guys, do me a favor right now. Jump on board and hit subscribe for me, please. All right. Let's get into some of these developments. Jackson Cantwell, the industry's number 1 overall player, makes a major cut to his top schools. He is now down to a top 6. Got Georgia, Miami, Missouri, Michigan, Ohio State, and Oregon. I would say there's no real surprises in here. I mean, Michigan makes it. Maybe I thought Tennessee was going to, I would say maybe to me, Tennessee not making it is the biggest surprise, but no major surprises here in terms of the teams that made the cut. However, this definitely if you were a program like a Nebraska, like a Tennessee that wondered where you stood with Jackson Cantwell, well, you got your answer. You're either out or you got a lot of work to do. But the teams that are in, they are legitimate players. I think I know it's early. It's very early, but I could see Georgia, Miami, Mizzou, Michigan, Ohio State, or Oregon. I could see any of the 6 programs landing Jackson Cantwell right now. So what's next for Cantwell? It's not a decision. It's his official visits. Now that we got a top 6, I think you can kind of see where these visits are going to go. I would be surprised if he did not take an official visit to all of his top 6s. We'll just have to wait and see. But I think that's what's next for Jackson Cantwell. I think we see him take these official visits in the summer. Then I think at the earliest, maybe we see it July, August, September decision for On3 industry number 1 player, Jackson Cantwell. All right, from one number 1 player to another, we got number 1 quarterback Jared Curtis. He locks in an Auburn official visit. That is right. The Auburn Tigers are the 4th official visit. Now, they'll actually be his first, but the reason I say 4th is because Jared Curtis already locked in June official visits to Oregon, Georgia, and South Carolina in that order. Now he's put Auburn on the books, and Auburn jumped the line. They're going to get him on campus May 16 through 18. So an early official visit. How does that play out for Jared Curtis if he's making a late decision? Will this visit be too far in the rear view, or does Auburn get in there and really make a big impact and then maybe get him back to, you got that Big Cat event at the end of the summer. There's some ways that Auburn could look at this, and I think it's a good thing. However you can get the number 1 quarterback on campus, just get him on campus, and that's what Auburn did. They're going to get him there for May 16 through 18. So we'll see who else locks in for an official visit during that weekend. It could turn out to be a really big one. All right, next topic I want to talk about is Nebraska canceling their spring game. Now, this relates to recruiting. Just hear me out. The reason Matt Rule canceled the spring game, I think, the main reason is so his players don't get poached. He doesn't want to put on tape, and we're not talking here about the starters. Like, we're not talking about Dylan Raiola. We're talking about the 3rd and 4th stringers. The guys that kind of play the majority of the game. They're in the 3rd and 4th quarter. What he's saying is, I don't want to put on tape what some of our younger up-and-coming guys are doing, only so schools can come knock on their door and say, hey, I know you're not on the 2 deep at Nebraska, but why don't you come here? You'll be a 2nd stringer. You'll be a starter. So basically, Matt Rule doesn't want to put that on film for other teams to come and poach. And to relate it back to recruiting even more, this is usually a big weekend for visits. The spring game is a time where the coaches, there is a big game being played. Well, a big game in terms of development, but they have a lot of time to spend with recruits. So it'll be interesting to see how Nebraska navigates this. I'm sure they're just not punting in total on having a big recruiting weekend. We have to see, does that big recruiting weekend now come earlier for a scrimmage or something? We'll just have to wait and see. But Nebraska canceling its spring game due to recruiting also impacts its recruiting. So we'll see how this plays out for Nebraska recruiting. All right, the last big topic we got to talk about is USC's Junior Day weekend. They had some stars out in LA. There's big Junior Day weekends all across America, but I think none bigger than USC, which is why we're going to have Scott Schrader on the show, and we're going to go in depth on this. But having Chris Henry Jr. there was great. Jonas Williams, a big-time flip target now from Oregon. Could he be flipping to USC? We'll see. But I think one of the biggest, most important names on campus was Xavier Griffin. I know he's already committed to USC, but he's from the state of Georgia, and we know what has happened historically with these early Georgia commitments. Well, commitments out of Georgia. But the reason I think it's big, not just because he was on campus in LA, but because Georgia and Alabama, both programs that I think if anybody's going to flip the elite linebacker from USC, I'd be looking at both of those programs had big visit weekends, and he was at neither of them. He was at USC. So a huge weekend is the Trojans sit at number 2 already, number 2 in the 2026 rankings. They have a legit shot at the number 1 class. We're going to go more in depth on that. But these were some of the biggest developments from a busy weekend as we head into the dead period. You guys talked to me. Was it Jackson Cantwell, Jared Curtis, Nebraska, USC, or something else? You guys let me know. Comment section below. What was the biggest development of the weekend? Let's talk a little Georgia recruiting as the Dogs hosted a big Junior Day. There was a lot of out-of-state talent on campus this weekend in Athens, and we got Jeremy Johnson from Dogs HQ. He's going to drop some intel on some of the biggest names that were in town. Georgia fans, before we get going, do me a favor right now. Hit subscribe to the On3 Recruit channel. We're trying to grow this page. We want UGA fans to be a part of it. All right, let's bring in Jeremy Johnson from Dogs HQ, and let's start at the running back position because there was 2 absolute studs on campus. I'm talking Savion Hyder out of Virginia and Derek Cooper from Fort Lauderdale. We're talking about the number 1 and number 2 ranked running backs in the entire cycle. Jeremy, what did you learn from these 2 over the weekend?
Yeah, talk about a dream duo, huh? Both of those guys love Georgia. I mean, they keep coming back literally every chance that they get to come to Georgia. They're at Georgia. I talked to Derek Cooper a couple weeks ago, and he was like, man, Georgia feels like home. I mean, he's just trying to make sure that's what he wants to do and trying to make sure that he really can make it feel that way. And he's been candid about how he feels about Georgia. I mean, there's a long way to go. Obviously, the hometown team, Miami, is a team to watch for sure. And Auburn is in there as well. So Savion Hyder is, he's also kind of said the same thing. He's been really high on Georgia. Michigan's obviously a big contender. Ohio State, some of these other schools that are in his recruitment are definitely in it as well. So, just getting those guys back on campus is always good. The fact that they keep coming back is something you're never going to – I feel like we say this a lot. You obviously follow the visits, and if people keep coming to campus, that means they like what they see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's just the way Georgia's been recruiting the running back position in 2026. It's like, I don't know exactly which chips are going to fall where, but the one thing I do know is Georgia's in line for a top-tier running back in this cycle. So we'll see how it plays out, but getting these 2 big names on campus was huge. One more name from out of state that I want to hit on is James Johnson. He's a defensive lineman from Cape Coral, Florida, 6'4", 275, top 150 prospect overall. Watched his tape, really a dominant interior defensive lineman. What did you think of where Georgia stands coming out of this trip?
Yeah, I mean, got a chance to get some of his thoughts last night after the visit, and he seemed really blown away. He seemed like the guy that was like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know exactly what I was getting into coming to Georgia and kind of seeing what they do. He admitted that Georgia wasn't even on his radar maybe 2 weeks ago, but that's what happens this time of year. You get Kirby Smart on the road to come see you, or you get Trey Scott to go on to come see you in person, and then boom, you get on campus and you package that together, and now you got a real shot at one of the premier defensive linemen in this 2026 class. And I think this weekend kind of hammered home for him like what Georgia is all about as far as their culture, the way they develop people. And I'm sure he knows about some of the defensive linemen they've sent to the NFL in the last couple of years. And I think, he's like, man, I could come here and be one of these types of guys. So Georgia's a real option for James now. I really didn't think that, that was probably the case a month ago, but things change in recruiting.
All right. Well, with these early visits, I know fans are sitting here thinking, well, how many commitments did we get? Well, it's February, literally February 2nd as we tape this today. So, one of the things that Georgia's trying to do is lock down official visits. And that's just what they did with two really good players, Carter Scruggs out of Leesburg, Virginia, and cornerback Caden Harris from Brownsville, Tennessee. Now, Scruggs is an offensive lineman, top 10 player at his position. Caden Harris, really valuable corner. What do you make of these? First of all, when will these official visits take place? And what do you make of where these guys stand with the Dogs?
Yeah, Caden Harris will be on campus June 6th through the 8th. That is his official visit. Carter Scruggs is going to be June 20th through the 22nd, I guess, that weekend. It'll be his last of the 4 official visits he set. I feel good about Georgia and both of these recruitments, and I don't think I would have said that coming in. I mean, maybe it's obviously we talk about guys get on campus and they just love everything about the program they just saw, but I mean, I just having a chance to talk to Carter a little bit, he seems like Georgia is like opened his eyes, and this was another case where he kind of explained it that he didn't know that Georgia he didn't think Georgia was sure of how interested in them that he was. I mean, he kind of they lightly recruiting him, and then they got on. Stacey Searles went up there to see him, and he was like, "Oh no, I'm very interested in what Georgia has to offer, and I'm really wanting to hear what you guys have to say in his recruitment." And I think that kind of opened Georgia's eyes, and things have picked up a little bit. And now he got on campus, and he was blown away by what he saw yesterday and into last night. And then Caden Harris, I mean, he's been in communication with Georgia, but then he got on campus this week, and poof, and it's the relationships. Obviously, there's some other schools in recruitment, but they were building the relationship and getting to know some of the developmental parts of the program at Georgia really kind of helped open his eyes a little bit. So Georgia's a real factor in both of these recruitments. I wouldn't say they're number 1 or number 2 yet. I mean, but you secure an official visit, and in the summer, and things happen really quickly during that time. So the fact in that scenario, if you're Georgia, you got to feel good about that.
All right. So I said at the top, there was a lot of out-of-state talent coming to campus this weekend. And sometimes with that, you get some guys coming in where you kind of hit on it where, hey, I don't really think this guy's a big-time Georgia target. But then he takes that visit. He has some things to say. So who's somebody that you feel that Georgia made a move with over the weekend?
I mean, the guy we've mentioned James Johnson. I really feel like
that was the one.
That was the main one. I mean, they were nowhere in the picture. And now, I mean, like I said, I can't say number 1 or number 2, but
yeah,
on the board, and as a defensive lineman that's got the skill set that he has, you got to consider it and you got to think about it. And there's going to be a need there at Georgia. So I think that's one that really moved. And then Carter Scruggs, like I said, he didn't even Georgia didn't even seem to, know he was interested. And now he's like one of the an official visit. So like that, those two to me stand out the most. I mean, there's some of these guys that like Peyton Dyer from South Carolina commit that, has been on campus a few times, but we haven't really gotten his quotes yet. But like just him being back on campus again, Dante Williams going to see him. I think Kirby Smart went to see him last week. Like there is some real interest there as well. And he's a really good football player that that locked in with South Carolina early. That Georgia's showing that we're going to pursue you and we're going to come get you. And I think there's some mutual. I'm willing to listen there with Peyton Dyer.
All right. Well, here come the Dogs. You can kind of feel the momentum coming out of this big visit weekend. Georgia fans, talk to Jeremy and I. How are you guys feeling coming out of this weekend? Savion Hyder, Derek Cooper. Do you think that Georgia can land the dynamic duo of running backs number 1 and number 2? Let us know. Comment section below. Let's talk some Alabama recruiting. And we have been talking a lot of Alabama recruiting on this channel, but it's been mostly about the Bama coaches out on the road seeing top targets. But this weekend, it's going to be about the top targets coming to Tuscaloosa to visit them. It was a huge weekend. So we got Andrew Bone from Bama Online. He's going to take us behind the scenes of this important junior day. But first, Bama fans, do me a favor. Hit subscribe to the On3 Recruits channel. We're trying to grow this thing, and we need Bama fans to be a part of it. Jump on board and hit subscribe. All right, let's bring in Andrew Bone from Bama Online. And you guys have confirmed close to 50 legitimate names of prospects from 26, 27. So go to Bama Online. Go check out all they got going on. But Andrew, I want to talk about the 5 stars with you, and we'll start with Tristan Keys out of Mississippi. He's the number 7 overall prospect in America. One of the best wide receivers. What is he saying coming out of this one?
Well, he had a lot of high praise about Alabama coming after the weekend. This is a guy that Alabama has recruited for a while, but this was also his first trip to Tuscaloosa, so you kind of wanted to see what he thought about the campus, the facilities. He already had a great relationship with coaching staff, including Jamarcus Shepard. So this was more about being around the players on the team, being around the support staff, getting a chance to meet the medical, training, strength and conditioning staff. All of that was very positive for him. He had a lot of great things to say about the weekend. I think Alabama has certainly made a strong push there. Even though it's still several months until he signs, I think Alabama's done a really good job as far as getting him to strongly consider them and get an official visit out of it. So we expect him to come back to Tuscaloosa for an official, but also for a spring visit. So getting him on campus right before the dead period, very important for Alabama.
Yeah, he said something to Steve Wiltfong that struck me. He said, quote, "I got to be around a couple guys I may end up being in the locker room with," end quote. Now, to me, that sounds like not only is he going to be interested in Bama moving forward, but he sees some other guys on campus that were also really interested in the Tide this weekend.
That's right. We saw Alabama this past year. They signed the number 3 recruiting class according to On3 Sports. And a lot of those guys that were in that class, they were around these recruits this weekend. And there was a lot of, obviously a lot of high school rising seniors, a few rising juniors that were in Tuscaloosa. But being around guys that had just signed with Alabama from different parts of the country, I think that was a good thing for Alabama as far as developing these relationships with these guys and trying to sell them on why they chose Alabama, but also why some of these 5 stars and top 100 guys should come to Alabama next year.
All right, let's move on and talk about, we go from number 7 to number 8. Brandon Arrington, the number 1 athlete in America. He's been on this channel before, said kind of that Texas A&M was his leader, but he's also made some West Coast visits as well. What's your feel for the number 1 athlete in America after he was in Tuscaloosa this weekend?
I think Alabama made a big move for Brandon Arrington. He said that he had a lot of great things to say about the trip to Tuscaloosa. I think the most important thing with Brandon Arrington was he arrived in town on Friday. So he spent Friday, Saturday before leaving town on Sunday, and really had a great trip. Originally was recruited as a wide receiver, wants to play defensive back, so he got a chance to spend some time with defensive back coaches, but also the defensive backs that are on the roster that are from California, guys like Dijon Lee. You have Damani Jackson, Xavier Brown. Those are guys that are from the West Coast, from California, that he's known, that he's had relationships with. And, those guys are going to be recruiting them. Last year we saw Damani and Xavier. They were such a big factor in decisions for Dijon Lee and Chuck McDonald, 2 guys on the West Coast that Alabama signed. So now we're going to kind of see Dijon Lee, Chuck McDonald recruiting Brandon Arrington in this cycle. But I think going into the weekend, this was a guy that Alabama probably made the biggest move with. As you mentioned, Texas A&M had been at the top of the list. But I think after this weekend, Alabama may have moved ahead. But there's still a long way to go. And we know those official visits are going to be important in the spring and summer.
Yeah, they definitely will. Now, we're talking about out-of-state guys, but there was a big one in-state. The number 1 player in the state of Alabama, edge Anthony Jones, was on campus. Really important to lock down the state of Alabama. I know it's fun to go out to California and fire up that pipeline from Cali to T-Town, but it's also important to get these top in-state guys. What are you hearing on edge Anthony Jones coming out of this one?
Yeah, you said it. I mean, Alabama recruited extremely well out of state this past cycle, but this year there's going to be a lot of focus in state, and there's a lot of attention, especially from the fan base after last year, only signing 2 in-state guys. We saw several in-state recruits in Tuscaloosa, several that already have offers. I think there were 10 in-state recruits that have offers from Alabama that were in Tuscaloosa on Saturday for Junior Day, including Anthony Jones. And this is a guy that has been recruited by this coaching staff since last January. If you look back, Coach DeBoer and the staff went and saw Anthony Jones. He was one of the first kids they saw last January after arriving as the head coach of the Crimson Tide. So this is a relationship that's gone on for a long time. He was back in town, had a lot of really positive things to say, but we've talked to him kind of throughout this last month. And he had Christian Robinson, Freddie Roach, Coach DeBoer at one of his basketball games about a week and a half ago, and was really impressed by them coming out and seeing him. But I think Alabama, as of right now, is in that top group as far as top 2, top 3, and they're going to be there all the way until the end of this, until he gets ready to make his decision. So we're going to be watching Anthony Jones closely, but there's several guys in state that I feel like Alabama's got a great shot with, and they had a lot of those top guys on campus this weekend.
Yeah, Anthony Jones is going to be one of these battles that we definitely have a close eye on for Alabama fans until that decision gets made. Let's hit on a couple more. One I want to bring up is Sincere Johnson, a great linebacker prospect, 6'3", 235, top 10 at his position, and he's from Glenville High School in Cleveland. We know they produce some superstars out of Glenville High School. So what's your read on him? I know, coming from Cleveland, not exactly an area that Alabama hits all the time.
Yeah, and we saw Alabama go into Ohio last year and sign one of the best players in Justin Hill out of Cincinnati. Now they're over in Cleveland and really trying to get Sincere Johnson. This is a kid that they offered just less than a month ago. I think it was January the 8th when they extended him the offer, and this was his first trip to Tuscaloosa. He's been to Alabama before. He's actually has family in Auburn. Now, Auburn's not a finalist for him or a top contender in his recruitment at this time, but Alabama is, and he had a great trip Tuscaloosa this weekend, being recruited as an inside linebacker. He's already hit it off really well with Chuck Morrell, new linebackers coach for the Crimson Tide. But getting to campus for the first time was really important, especially before the dead period. So we certainly think that Alabama is going to be a major factor in his recruitment. But as you said, it's a tough area to recruit in the state of Ohio, especially with the Buckeyes, because considering him one of their top targets.
Yeah, and you said that Sincere Johnson picked up that offer about a month ago, and now he's a priority, he's a top target. Well, there was a new offer that went out this weekend, and I have a feeling Alabama fans are going to need to know this name. Chris Booker, he's from Atlanta, his first big time offer. I mean, he's got Georgia State, Georgia Southern, USF, some others like that in that range, but now the Tide have offered 6'4", 275 pounds. Obviously, this is a guy that they've gone to evaluate. Now they made it to campus. They offered him. What do you think this offer means for Booker and his recruitment?
Well, it's huge for him, no doubt about it. We talked about him on BOL the other day. I think he was the only player that visited Alabama this weekend for Junior Day that did not have an offer prior to his visit from the Crimson Tide. So getting him on campus, getting a chance to kind of sit down with him, meet his family, get the accurate measurements, 6'4". I think he's right over 280 pounds. Alabama really likes him as an interior offensive lineman. He doesn't have that big list of offers yet, but I would expect it's about to start growing, especially with Alabama jumping in there. Now, he had Mississippi State, Kentucky. Those were some of the early offers, but you look back a year ago, Alabama was offering guys that nobody was really talking about then either, like Jackson Lloyd and Michael Carroll. So I trust this Alabama offensive coaching staff when they're evaluating offensive linemen, and they've done a good job so far. And this is a kid that I think really going to explode. And a lot of people have asked if he's related to Tyler Booker, but he's not. No relation there to Tyler Booker, but definitely a interior guard that they are, or center that they are certainly going to amp things up with over the course of the next several months.
Yeah, thanks for clearing that up. You guys covered a huge week, and you and Tim Watts do a phenomenal job over on Bama Online. We really only scratched the surface of big names that were on campus, so I implore you guys to go check that out. But Alabama fans, talk to us. How do you feel about this first big Junior Day weekend? I mean, it was absolutely massive. Who are some of your top targets heading out of it? Let us know. Comment section below. Let's talk a little USC recruiting, as the Trojans, they're absolutely on fire when it comes to the 2026 class. And currently, they have the number 2 ranked class in the cycle. But after this weekend, USC could be making a legit run at the number 1 class. We got Scott Schrader from We Are SC. He's going to take us behind the scenes of a massive visit weekend out in USC. So before we get going, Trojan fans, you guys do me a favor right now. Hit the subscribe button to the On3 Recruit channel. We're trying to get this thing to 100K. We need USC fans to be a part of it. Jump on board, hit subscribe. All right, let's bring in Scott Schrader from We Are SC. Some big names on campus. You had commits like RJ Sermons, Xavier Griffin. They were big names to have on campus this weekend, but seeing Chris Henry Jr. there, Jonas Williams there, I mean, this was quite the event that USC put on. So let's start with number one wide receiver from Mater Dei High School, Chris Henry Jr. Scott, was this a significant visit? Was this his first trip to USC this year, in a couple weeks, a couple months?
Yeah, I think this was probably his first visit to USC. I don't even think he showed up last season. So it was his first visit to USC probably since last spring, summer, right on the cusp of when the transition went from there, maybe in June or something like that. So it's been a while for him. I was mildly surprised that he was on the visit list. We weren't surprised he showed up, but it's one of those things where all things that we hear, it seems like he's pretty solid with Ohio State. Oregon's making a strong run, but you never know. Something like this, as we were talking about earlier, something like this might lead to another visit, and then another visit after that, and next thing you know, you're in a full-fledged recruiting battle with a few schools. So yeah, it was not surprising, shocking, but it was kind of surprising he was on our list.
Yeah. And, as we head into the dead period in February for a month, we'll have a chance to see if Chris Henry comes out of this and shows back up at USC, maybe for a spring practice. Then does he schedule an OV in the summer? But do you think that a visit like this was imperative for USC and Chris Henry to even be a thing moving forward?
Well, I look at it this way. USC hired, a new inside receivers coach, tight end inside receivers coach. I don't know exactly where they plan on playing Chris Henry at USC, but I think they hired a guy that was really, really connected as well as any coach we've seen with the Southern California kids in the Southern California program, in Chad Savage. He came from Colorado State, but he made Southern California his second home, and I've never heard high school football coaches talk about another college coach quite the way that collectively the coaches in Southern California do. So, I think that there's a big part of maybe they've got a new coach there that could be recruiting Chris Henry, and obviously that would be significant. So, I do think that getting him on campus for this past weekend on Saturday was a big deal because it was a pretty darn impressive group. It was probably the most impressive group of early February visitors I've seen in a long time.
Yeah. And, heading into the weekend, Chris Henry Jr., he was on your list, but one name that wasn't was quarterback Jonas Williams, the Oregon commit, top 10 quarterback from Illinois. What did you make of him stepping on campus this weekend?
It's interesting is that, their main target for 2026 has been Ryder Lyons. But we, those of us that know anything about what's going on with his recruitment understand that he's really going to be a class of 2027 prospect when he's after he serves his Mormon mission. So USC was needing to pursue some 2026 quarterbacks. And it really had not gotten to the point where I had a definitive answer on who that was going to be, because all this time it's pretty much been Ryder Lyons. But I think as we now get into the class of 2026, they're identifying some of these quarterbacks, and I know that USC had contacted him for the first time last year when I was in Dallas for the OT7. So maybe communications have just kind of picked up a little bit over the past few months, and that was a big surprise for me when Steve hit me up that he was visiting. I was pretty darn surprised.
All right, so another prospect I want to talk about, important target on campus for defensive line coach Eric Henderson, was four-star D lineman Tom Topui. He's also teammates with Chris Henry, so that was probably a good sign that both of them were there. Where do you think Tom stands with USC right now?
Yeah, I think I'll put him kind of in the same category as Jonas in a little bit, in that I think it was just significant that he showed up when he walked out of the sprinter van yesterday. You can't help but recognize Tom. I was like, damn, and he even kind of said something. He's like, "Yep, I'm here," and I think it's a big deal. I think that one thing that USC has going for them on the defensive side of the ball, especially, is they have one of the best coaching staffs in the country, and these kids feel that when they're at USC. A lot of NFL guys, and they just added Rob Ryan, and that was significant with some of the linebackers there, including Xavier Griffin. Guys are just getting their first chance to meet those guys, but I think the more guys like Tom hang around USC, obviously the better their chances are of flipping him. I would say 2 months ago, I thought the chances were probably next to zero, but he shows up yesterday and kind of says some of the things he did about the visit and about the USC football program. That changes our perspective a little bit.
Yeah. All right. So huge weekend at USC. You guys do a phenomenal job of covering. We're only scratching the surface here. But I wanted to open it up to you. Who else do you think that USC made a big impression on this weekend?
Well, another guy that was a surprise that showed up was Tiki. Now I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name. I haven't met him. Tiki, is it Tiki Hola
Sounds good to me.
from Texas? Yeah, sounds good to you. This is when we need a friend from Texas to help us out here. Anyway, he's an extremely talented defensive lineman from Bastrop, Texas, which is just outside of Austin. And USC made a late visit there. I think it was Thursday. Sean Nua and Lincoln Riley showed up for a school visit, and him turning around and showing up at USC yesterday. I think that would have to be at the top of my list for making a strong impression on somebody. So he's a guy that we expect to be back again and ultimately take an official visit. Some other guys that they've really been recruiting for a while and kind of been in a really good shape with. Devon Benjamin from Oaks Christian. I think it's kind of turning into USC Oregon battle there, and USC kind of feels good about them. Oregon feels good about where they stand. Samote Katoanga from Jay Sarah, really, really, really impressive edge prospect from San Juan Capistrano. He's another guy that, there's predictions in. Steve Wilfong's put a prediction in for him. I would if I knew he had an announcement date. Also for USC. So I think, that was another guy they made another strong impression with. But I think another receiver from Mission Viejo, California, that's committed to Georgia, Vance Spafford. That is another guy I think that USC made a lot of ground up with here recently, and I will include the hire of Chad Savage, new inside receivers coach, as being a main reason for USC having a shot with Vance now.
All right, big weekend in LA. Trojan fans, talk to Scott and I. How are we feeling? Is this a legitimate run that USC is making at the #1 class in America? Let us know. Comment section below.